Boy, so we are blessed. Jesse and Jesse will tell you more about himself, are with the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. We are advocacy mobilizers, and we are so grateful to be working with some wonderful, wonderful people, our AHF, AIDS Healthcare Foundation staff, mobilizers, and let's not leave out our magnificent advocates. We love each and every one of you, and our speakers are here to bring, I like to say bring the word, we're going to bring the noise for you today. We are excited about the speakers we have. So if I'm going to get to that agenda, just quickly kind of run through to give you a feel for today, of where we're going, what we're doing. And we're going to try to definitely stay on track. We want to make sure that we have time for you to be able to speak with our honorable guests, ask some questions. It is important to us to make sure our communities are informed. We are not here to tell you or suggest you either way, tell you what to do or what not to do when it comes to the vaccine. It is everybody's choice. It is everybody's decision. But we think it is crucial that in making that decision, that you're able to have the best information possible that you can have, so you can make an educated decision, an informed decision about what needs to be done. We will ask today, and you know what, I got my own too. So on the agenda, again, I'm Veronica Brisco with the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. I'm an advocacy mobilizer. I've been with them since 2014. Blessed to be here. I've been living with HIV for the past 20 years. Blessed and grateful that I am still here, y'all. Thriving, surviving, living, and living in my head. My grandma pin on. You probably can't see it because my son said, I am not grandma, I am glam-mom. I'm the glamorous grandma. All right, come on, y'all. Come on with me now. You're the glamorous grandma. We will not be calling you grandma. We will call you grandma, baby. So I have one biological grandchild, and I have 2 additional grandchildren and a whole bunch of other adopted ones. I tell you, it's a blessing in my life to have each and every one of them. Ezekiel is my son's, my biological son's child, and then I have my other adopted son, I call them, and they are Christopher and Chelsea. I mean, Christopher and Kaylin. Chelsea is their mommy. She's our assistant.
Hi.
So we want to just say, please, when someone is speaking, let's please make sure we are muted out. Let's use our etiquette. And please keep in mind that sometimes we get in Zoom and then we think people are not seeing us. But remember, we see you everywhere you go. Try not to take us in the bathroom with you today. I've had that happen. So let's try to be mindful and remember that we are all on Zoom with you. We love you. We just want to see your beautiful faces, though. So thank you for all that each and every one of you do. This has been a tough time. The past 2021 has been a challenge for many of us. But you know what? We are moving forward and we are moving on, and so grateful that we're able to do that. Chelsea, would you do me a favor and tell me what give me that first half of the agenda, please?
Yes, ma'am. It is 1 second.
Because my eyes are not
Well, you're doing it. It was just housekeeping that if you're not speaking, to keep your phones muted.
Okay.
We also invite you to type questions that you may have beforehand in the chat now, and we'll try to address them if they're not addressed with the speakers. But also, while the speakers are presenting, if you have questions come up, put them in the chat. If we don't get to all questions today, we plan to follow up after this event with answers to your questions. And so that's kind of the housekeeping, and Veronica said it. Don't take us to the bathroom with you. It's really awesome that, I got dressed today an event to get dressed, but then I figured like I don't really have to wear pants, but I'm wearing pants. See.
Make sure.
But yeah, so that's it. And just be respectful, mindful. We're here for a conversation. We don't have much time, so we're going to allow the presenters to present their topics, and then we'll kind of take questions at the last
Can
half
y'all hear
of.
me? Can you hear Miss Beard?
Yes,
Hello?
darling, we can hear you.
Hello, hello. Awesome.
We can hear you,
Okay,
love.
if you're not speaking, we need you to mute your phones.
Okay.
And so again, we'll take questions at the last half of the event. So I'm gonna turn it back. And just real quick, just introduce myself. I'm Jesse Brooks, a community activist in California. This is so beautiful. I'm here with my AHF colleague, Veronica Brisco, who is in South Carolina, Atlanta area. We also have other colleagues on the call as well in other states. And that's what's so beautiful about the AHF connection, is that we have advocate coordinators in all the states across the United States. And we're coming together today to talk about HIV and COVID. We've seen a lot of COVID Zooms, a lot of COVID talks, but we've never had one that specifically spoke to people living with HIV, the HIV community. And that's what we're here for today. So I'm gonna turn it back over to my BC, Veronica. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome, 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 y'all. So we are going to take a moment. There has been a program created, which I can also email to you, but we have some fantastic presenters today. I feel blessed because I'm telling you, we just always want to make sure, again, that we are informed. Let's make informed decisions. Let's not make decisions off of what we heard or what people think or what happened yesterday or the day before. Let's try and go ahead and make informed decisions. So when you see our program, it's going to give you details about each and every one of the speakers, and as well as who they are, where they come from, so that you know that we are not playing today. We have people who are knowledgeable, who are able to answer these questions. And again, we are very, very proud to have them as participants today. We have it's Marguerita Lightfoot, and again, Jesse off the track because my screen just closed. So I'm gonna let statistics and everything come on a little bit later, but we know that the numbers are very high with COVID-19. And in the HIV and AIDS arena, we're calling it the other epidemic, the other pandemic. Some people are calling it that because this is the numbers are so high. And I'll be honest with you, I stopped counting at 10 when I lost people who passed away. So this is just not something to do today. This is something that means something to many more of us, I'm sure, as well. But when you have over 10 people who actually pass away, so grateful for the people who are still here, who got through that process and who was able to make it through and survive. But let's keep in mind, people, that everyone, that there are people who did not make it. Mm-hmm. So we can take a moment of silence, if I will. I'm just drawing this in, BC, just for the people who are not here, just a few seconds, if you will, to hold them up and their families and all those loved ones around them in prayer. As a matter of fact, can I throw you under the bus? Not you hear from me. Or a quick prayer? No? Okay, I'm not sure. All right, so anyway, moment of silence. Thank you for that. So, something, MLK said, caring for others, and we're talking about caring for others and ourselves, y'all. we want to make sure that we're caring for others and loving on others the way that they needed to be loved on. And right now, I've already introduced myself. I'm going to turn it over to my BC, Jesse Brooks, who are going to talk a little bit more about why we're here today. HIV is a social justice issue, y'all, but look, COVID is a social justice issue as well. And why now? I just shared a little bit about why now, why this Zoom now, because we need to make sure people are informed. So, Jesse?
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. And again, thanks everybody for coming to this Zoom. I think it's really important that we have this conversation. We're in unprecedented times, a lot of things going on. This is also in memory of Dr. King. So as we do this, we're talking about reaching the mountaintop on so many issues, on social unrest, on political unrest, on COVID and the pandemic. And I think that being HIV, my name is Jesse Brooks again, and I've been HIV positive since 1993 that I knew of. It kind of reminds me, it brought up a lot of feelings for me to be in this COVID pandemic of the HIV pandemic, that there was a lot of fear, a lot of mistrust, and a lot of uncertainty when HIV first hit the general population. And we had to wait for information from the scientists. We try to work on people's behaviors, just like COVID, we're asking people to wear masks, 6 feet apart. HIV was condom use, to keep your partners to a small. So it's a lot of dual similarities in this pandemic. But what prompted us to want to do a COVID Zoom on HIV is that they generalized that people with compromised immune systems shouldn't take the vaccine. And we're like, what does that mean? Because today people with HIV are in so many different places where some people are adherent to their drugs and they're undetectable. And then even the question of how did they get a vaccine so fast for COVID? And we've been waiting over 30 years for HIV. So we're going to get to all those questions and answers today. We have an illustrious panel. I'm going to kind of go through our panel real quick now because I don't want to take up time and introduce each one. So they'll follow each one. So the first person we'll have of our panel is Dr. Sophy Wong. And Dr. Sophy Wong, I call her our own Dr. Fachi, and they call her Dr. Mass here. She's in Oakland, California. She began working in the HIV community in 1996 as an advocate and case manager. She was trained at UCSF, San Francisco General Hospital, and has worked globally in Kenya, Tanzania, and China. She serves right now for us as the director of East Bay Getting to Zero. She's our medical director for the Bay Area AETC and HIV Access, and also a clinical advisor for Health Pack. She's also, which is the Alameda County's Health Safety Net program. Her work focuses on capacity building, and she's amazing at that. Collaborative solutions, quality improvement for healthcare teams and systems on HIV prevention, PrEP, testing, linkage, and treatment across the entire prevention and care continuum with the goal to get us all closer to achieving health equity. And then when COVID hit, she had to be she had to bend towards COVID and HIV at the same time. So she's became our county expert on COVID, and she sends out a weekly update on COVID stats here in California. As you know, our Californians experienced one of the highest transmissions and deaths in our country. So I'm actually going to introduce each speaker as they come up, because if I did, you would forget everything I just said. So we're going to, so actually, I don't know why I did all that about Sophy, because our first presenter is Marguerita Lightfoot, who is a Ph.D., is a professor of medicine at UCSF School of Medicine. She's the chief for the Division of Prevention Science and director of Center for AIDS Prevention Study, CAPS, and UCSF Prevention Research Center, PRC. She has an established research career conducting community-involved research, receiving numerous awards for her community partnership efforts. She is considered considerably experienced designing and implementing preventative intervention, and has developed culturally competent, effectuous HIV interventions for delinquent adolescents, runaway homeless youth. She's just amazing, and her bio is really long, so I'm going to stop there. And she's going to go through vaccine trials and talk about the history of vaccines, and also the security measures that have been put in place since people have been taken advantage of, especially people of color, and the distrust. And so now there's so many security measures. I work with her. I'm a community advisory board. I sit on their board. And so it's my pleasure to present Dr. Marguerita Lightfoot.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Jesse. Very generous. Really happy to be here. Also thankful that you all invited me and included me in this. I'm going to try to just go quickly. I think I have about 10 minutes to tell you a little bit about the history of vaccines and vaccines in general. So I have a couple of slides. So let me see if I can just share here. Oh, I don't have. Oh, it's disabled. Is it possible to allow me to share my screen?
Yes, we're
Right
going
now
to
it's
assign you
disabled.
as host.
Okay.
So Chelsea, could you assign her as host, please?
If not, that may be on me. I am working it now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so just as background, the earliest time that we've seen any recorded history of vaccinations happening was in the 1500s, if you can believe that. And it was really the early Chinese and in India, where folks were inoculating people for smallpox. And the way that they were doing that is that they were taking the sores from smallpox and they were scraping off some of the scabs. And then they would inhale those or blow those scabs into someone's nose. And the idea with most vaccines is that you're trying to get your own immune system to activate and to kickstart it into fighting. And so if you introduce a little bit of a disease, and then that trains your immune system to fight that disease, so that when you're actually exposed to the whole thing, to the real disease, or full-blown disease, your body's already prepped to fight it. And so back in the early 1500s, in China and in India, they were doing that with smallpox. Let's see if I'm still not able to share. That's okay. So some of the
Wait, no, it's not okay.
I did make it co-host. I did make co-host. And bear with us.
You assigned Sophy, Veronica. You need to assign Dr. Lightfoot.
Okay, I thought I could do both at the same time, so I guess we knocked the other out. My apologies.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So right now, one of the very first kind of recorded mass vaccinations happened in the 1700s with a vaccine for cowpox. And that was basically, it's an uncommon disease. It was something that folks could get from cows. It was passed from cows to humans. And so that was like the first kind of national broad-based vaccine in order to try to get people vaccinated against that. Since then, in the 1800s, there was a vaccination for cholera, chickenpox, rabies. Our first typhoid vaccine was in the 1900s, 1911. First vaccination for tetanus was in 1927. And our first flu vaccine actually was in 1936. And kind of in the modern days, in the 1950s, we saw vaccines for polio, for whooping cough. In the 1960s, we saw vaccines for measles, mumps, rubella, and more recently in the 2000s, you've seen those vaccines for HPV, or human papilloma virus. So we've had a long history of vaccinating folks, and because of vaccinations, we've been able to see things like you hardly ever see polio now because people are vaccinated and it doesn't pass. Very few mumps, very few cases of whooping cough. So we've really been able to keep those vaccines have been able to keep diseases, and we've pretty much had diseases. Here we go. We've knocked them out of modern time. But there are a number of things that we need to be considering when we're talking about vaccines. So these ethics of vaccines. And so there's been kind of four main things when you think about vaccines that we've been talking about. One is, really, should vaccines be mandated? Should we make people take vaccines? So the first, in the 1850s is when we first started having requirements for vaccinations in schools. Most vaccinations are happening for children. And in 1950s is when we started mandating school vaccinations for the first smallpox. And so some of the primary reasons that folks are against these mandated vaccines is that some individuals and communities might disagree with the mandates. You know, they might have religion or philosophical beliefs that kind of conflict with the vaccination. And some have argued that public health vaccination regulations could infringe upon the individual autonomy and liberty of people. So a real recent example is the HP vaccine. The HP vaccine was first approved by the FDA in 2006. It was recommended that girls take this vaccine when they're 11 or 12 years old. And some state legislature started to mandate that vaccination. Well, but then there were religious concerns that were expressed about the vaccine's ability to protect against an STD. That, you know, the vaccine protects against an STD, and that kind of runs contrary to the abstinence-based messages that some religious proponents were wanting to really focus on. There was also fears that the vaccine could potentially force a child to undergo an intervention that was not in alignment with the family's beliefs. So there is this whole sense of people having religious or personal reasons for not wanting to get vaccinated. So in that context, should we really be mandating people to get vaccinated? So that's one of the things that have really been discussed in terms of the ethics of vaccines. Then there's also the ethics that come into the research and testing that goes into vaccines. So vaccines go through many years of research, and they go through really rigorous safety and efficacy testing. But the process also, I should say, includes a diverse set of experts from many scientific and social disciplines. So usually there's the epidemiologists and people from immunology, people from public health. There are groups of folks who are going through and planning these vaccine trials and monitoring the vaccine trials over time. But also what happens is sometimes researchers disagree about who to include in the vaccine trials. Should someone who has pre-existing conditions be included? Should someone who's HIV positive be included? So there's always those debates about when you're coming up with a vaccine and you're testing it out, who do you include? We also know that oftentimes these vaccines are tested in what's called a clinical trial, where there's some people get the vaccine and then some people get what's called a placebo, or a sugar pill, basically, something that's not a vaccine. And so if that control group then is not getting what we think is going to be beneficial, and is that okay? There's also the ethical issues and conversations around those. There's also, ethically, we need to ensure that there's meaningful involvement of the local communities in the research, and that's not always done. And so we have to ensure, because there's a lot of work to ensure that that's done. We have to ensure that the participants understand what they're signing up for when they're doing when they're being involved in some of these trials for vaccines, making sure when they're signing the consent that they understand what it is that they're signing up for, what they're expecting, what should be expected. And then also there needs to be very clear procedures to ensure that what happens if somebody gets a disease that you're trying to prevent. So that's another piece of the ethical parts of the research and testing that we keep in mind. Also, informed consent. Federal guidelines currently do not require written consent before vaccination. But what is required is a vaccine information statement, which is intended to provide basic information about vaccines, the risks and benefits to vaccines, to the vaccine that you're taking, so that patient or the parent of a child can make an informed decision about whether or not to allow their child to, or for themselves to have that vaccine. There is some concern that having like this regulated written consent procedure may add unnecessary fear or concern to the vaccination process. So that's another piece of the conversation that people are having. Also, there's access issues when you talk about the ethical aspects of vaccines. So there's evidence that access to vaccination really depends on socioeconomic status and racial ethnic minority status, as you all probably would be aware. So low-income children and families without health insurance can face challenges to receiving vaccines and accessing those vaccines. There's also sometimes shortages in vaccinations. So a couple of years ago, you all may remember, there was a shortage of the flu vaccine. So because there's too few producers and suppliers of those vaccines. And so when there's those shortages, typically the folks who have fewer resources are the ones that are not able to access those few vaccines that might be available. So those are an overview of some of the bigger issues around the ethics of vaccines and the conversations that folks are having about that. Now, when you think about what does it take in order for a vaccine to even get into a place where people are having access to it, this chart gives you a sense of the life of what it takes in order to get a vaccine. So there's all of this biological research that happens that gets at the cellular level, how that begins to understand how the disease, the virus that you're trying to prevent, like how does that virus work, and where are opportunities to try to get that virus to not be either so infectious or keep you from getting so sick, and those kinds of things. And then once you've figured out, okay, we've done all that, we understand the virus, now we've developed this vaccination and we want to test it, there's different phases for the vaccines to go through. So and that's the green lines there in the development. The phase 1 is typically lasts only a couple months. The purpose of that phase 1 is to really evaluate the basic safety and to identify any really common reactions that people have. A phase 2 trial is larger, usually involves several hundred patients. They last anywhere from several months to a couple of years. That's the opportunity and the time when you start collecting additional information on safety and how well the vaccine actually works. Once you've gotten past phase 2 of a vaccine, you begin to understand how many doses are necessary. You begin to get a profile of what the common reactions to the vaccine are. You can move into phase 3 trial. So unless there's a lot of health problems with the vaccine, or it's been proven ineffective, most of the time you go into a phase 3 trial from there. And in the phase 3 trial, that's usually a few years, And that's when you compare the group that's been vaccinated with the group that's not been vaccinated to see how well that vaccination actually worked. And then if after the phase 3 trial shows that the vaccine does not cause harm and it actually prevents the disease, you go into phase 4, which is you start giving the vaccine to folks and you begin to monitor the safety. And you begin to monitor the safety ongoing after you've already given the vaccine. You start giving the vaccine to lots of people. You continue. So the process of understanding the impact of a vaccine never ends. There's always monitoring of what's happening with people who take the vaccine. So one of the questions is, if this is the process for coming up with the vaccine, how did they do the COVID vaccine so quickly? So there's a couple of reasons why. One is some of those phases that they already went through because there's been other coronaviruses. So because of what's happened in the past with coronaviruses, there's already been a lot of research around coronavirus. So this new novel coronavirus, which is the COVID that caused this COVID, it was really on this foundation of all of this research that had already happened around coronavirus. Another reason why they were able to go through this process so quickly for COVID is that there was really worldwide collaboration, which is not something that you typically see. So countries across the globe were sharing with each other their data, their information. And so it wasn't just this pharmaceutical company was just doing their own thing, or NIH in the US was just doing its own thing. Like as data was coming, people were sharing it. And there was no sense of like, oh, this is mine, I need to discover this. It was really all hands on deck and everyone was involved. There was also a lot of funding that went into the development of this vaccine. And so because there was such an investment, not only in our country, but in Europe and across the world, they poured in a lot of money that allowed a lot of research to happen very quickly. And so that's another reason why this went really quickly. And then the last thing I'll say about why they did get the COVID vaccine so fast is that the technology that they're using on this vaccine is different. So this vaccine, earlier I had said oftentimes vaccines are like you give somebody a part of the disease, a version of the disease that you're trying to prevent. Well, with COVID, they're using a whole different technology. So they didn't have to worry about trying to give people COVID to see or some version of COVID to then try to prevent it. This, and probably Sophie will get into maybe a little bit about how this vaccine works, but this particular vaccine doesn't do that at all. So because it's doing something different in terms of how it's getting your body's immune system to kick into gear, it also then was able to go through some of these more quickly as well. So that's why this process, why the COVID vaccine was able to go through this process so quickly. So I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing my screen. And I'll turn it over to Sophie.
Thank you, Marguerita Lightfoot. Really just an amazing honor to be with you all here today, and just also learning from Dr. Lightfoot and Pastor John and Desiree. Just really looking forward to hearing and learning from all of you and all your questions too. Really just want to know what's on your minds. What's on your minds about this? What can we talk about and learn from each other on? And so I'm going to share some slides to go through some of the questions that have come up so far. And please let me know if you have any problems seeing this. Can you all see my slides?
It is coming up.
Yes,
I can see
we
it
see
about.
Okay, cool.
Got it.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the intersections of HIV and COVID-19, along with prevention and vaccines. So there's some options here in terms of just what we can do to protect ourselves and protect our communities with the pandemic. So just some brief science. I'm going to try to keep my nerd stuff to the minimum, but you can see both HIV and COVID-19 are RNA viruses. What that means is that they use RNA, this genetic material, to basically enter our own cells and hijack our own cells. So in the case of HIV in the top left here, you know that it enters the CD4 receptor and the CD4 T cell, right? These are all familiar concepts to people living and working with HIV. And so in COVID, it's the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It enters a receptor called ACE2 in your respiratory system. So in your nose, mouth, and in your lungs. Both of these viruses basically inject RNA that then kind of forces our own cells to produce replicants or copies of itself. And that's how the viruses reproduce. And when the viruses when there's so many viruses reproducing in our cells, they break the cells and the cells they don't function anymore. So that's why we really look at CD4 cell counts with HIV. And in COVID, we look at what's happening in our respiratory system, right? Because these are the cells being hijacked by these viruses. In both of these viruses, ending the epidemics requires both prevention and treatment, or in the case of COVID, vaccination, really. And in both viruses, it's a race against resistance, right? In HIV, we want to get people on treatment and also on suppressive therapy so that the virus doesn't replicate and have mutations that then make it resistant to our treatments. Similarly, with COVID, we want to actually get enough people prevented and also on vaccinated so that the virus stops replicating and stops mutating, right? It needs to replicate to mutate. So it's a race against resistance in both of these cases for us. And, COVID spreads really rapidly, far more rapidly than HIV. And that is why it's so urgent, right? It kills fast, it spreads fast. So we got to really, this is why it feels urgent, because it is urgent. Now let's talk about HIV and does it increase a risk for COVID-19? And there are many factors that impact people living with HIV and their risk for COVID-19. One is that the same comorbidities that increase the risk for severe COVID-19 are actually more common among people living with HIV. That includes things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, obesity. In one cohort in Boston, looking at people living with HIV in Boston, about 80% of people living with HIV had comorbidities that increase the risk of severe COVID-19. So that is number one. And that, as many of you know, is part of, societal factors, right? Poverty, race, ethnicity, that put people at higher risk for these comorbidities, but also at higher risk for HIV and COVID-19 to begin with. So when you have to work outside the home, you don't have a choice to work outside the home to have just basic income, or you live in crowded living conditions because it's too expensive to live in, to live alone or to live in a big place by yourself or whatever, or live in just your nuclear family because you have to live with many people together, then that puts us at risk for COVID-19 as well. In addition, there are studies looking at people living with HIV and their risk for severe COVID. So what they found is that there is correlation with people who are immunocompromised. And for HIV, the cutoff we usually use is CD4 counts less than 200, right? That meets the definition for AIDS. So people living with HIV with CD4 counts less than 200 are shown to have higher hospitalization, higher ICU, higher ventilator, and higher death rates. So there is correlation between people living with HIV who are immunocompromised and worse outcomes. In addition, in the New York study, people living with HIV with viral loads greater than 200, so not on suppressive therapy, had increased rates of hospitalization. So there are correlations also with immunocompromised states of HIV and worse outcomes for COVID. However, we didn't see this as much with people who are on on effective suppressive therapy. And we didn't see this as much for people who have less immunocompromised because their CD4 counts are higher. So that's the good news. And that is also why we need to end the HIV epidemic, right? Like, this is why we need to make sure that all people living with HIV are diagnosed and have access to treatment, have the best success possible for themselves to be on suppressive therapy. So this is still part and parcel to ending the COVID-19 pandemic as well. You can't do both separately. It's like all together, right? This is the intersection of HIV and COVID-19. In addition, as I mentioned, the social determinants of health and the link to poverty and racism in the way our health outcomes are in this country, you can see that the disparities are also pretty similar. People of color are at higher risk for COVID and COVID deaths in the US, and as well as for HIV. So if you look at rates of new HIV diagnosis on the left-hand side here, you can see Black and Latinx folks are at higher risk for new HIV diagnosis. And then on the right-hand side is COVID-19 deaths in the United States. Again, rates per 100,000 people. And you can see it disproportionately impacts Black or African-American people, as well as Native, Indigenous people, Latinx, and Native Pacific Islanders. So disproportionate impact for our communities of color in both HIV and in COVID-19. So this is, as Jesse and Veronica mentioned, a serious social justice issue. This is why we do this work. It is so important for our communities to address these underlying disparities. So talking about prevention now, there are things that we can do. And what I tried to do here is I kind of keep a running list, which is kind of crazy, of all the different COVID-19 studies coming out and how effective they are in preventing spread of COVID-19. And just recently, in the last couple of months, I added vaccinations because now we have data on the efficacy, and it's really amazing. These are one of the most effective vaccines we've ever developed as a human species. So that is an amazing testament to the science that Dr. Lightfoot has just described. And these are the mRNA vaccines that are currently approved for vaccinations in the US. In addition, the other effective measures that we have at our disposal are masking. And Jesse had mentioned, masking and condom use. Like, these are proven and effective forms of protection. But as you know, human behavior is really complicated. It's not so easy just to say, wear a mask, right? We all know that it's a similar problem as saying, just use a condom, right? So it's not so simple. Human behavior is super complicated. And as a result, even though first of all, we messed up the messaging around masking in the United States, right? So there's that complication. But also, just having people consistently use masks is just a complicated behavioral issue as well. So, but it is something that we can use. It's something that people in Africa and in Asia do really well, in part because they know that's kind of one of the only things they have to prevent COVID-19. And so the messaging from public health people and from the governments in a lot of African and Asian countries have been really like gung-ho on masking, and they've done actually a really good job of it. So in the countries where we've seen really high rates of masking, you see lower rates of COVID-19. So there is some correlation there, and that's why we see a high risk reduction for that. Staying outdoors and distancing are kind of similar in some ways. What you're doing is COVID-19 is a respiratory virus. So SARS-CoV-2 is a respiratory virus. And so when you're in close proximity to somebody, it's much more likely that you're going to be encountering the respiratory secretions, right? So staying outdoors means that you have all infinite sky, right? You have Mother Earth, just like infinite sky, letting these respiratory droplets kind of disperse, right? And then similarly, when you're distancing, you're further away from these droplets. So really, there are three main things I would say that are really highly effective for preventing COVID-19. One is masking, two is distancing or being outdoors, and three is vaccinations. These are things that we know we can do, and the challenge for us is getting this out equitably to people, right? And there are different settings that we can also try to avoid. So this infographic is pretty complicated, but I just want to show you that there are places, lower risk things that we can do to be with people, to be with other people, being outdoors and having your mask on, right? Doing walks and runs or hiking or biking, right? These are lower risk. And then there's moderate risk things when masks are sometimes off outdoors. We want to try to limit the time we have our masks off. And then higher risk are indoor settings. And when we are in these indoor settings, as much as we can possibly wear our masks and stay distanced, this is where we prevent spread from one another. In the higher risk situations, we try to, we encourage people to avoid, but if you really can't, to try to stay distanced and have your mask on whenever possible, like indoor parties, coffee shops, restaurants, bars, hotels, and gyms. So all this stuff is on our website at ebgtz.org if you ever want to use it. In addition, we've been trying to get the word out around masking, and you can see here is Jesse and some of our friends who are on this call, just from our group, just really encouraging folks to just normalize masking, right? We just do it. And just encouraging people to visually have this as like, this is how our community looks when we meet with each other right now. And to basically piggyback on what Dr. Lightfoot talked about around vaccinations, this is a diagram of how mRNA vaccinations work. So these are the vaccines that are out now and available to some folks in the United States. An mRNA vaccine is basically using messenger RNA. That's what the M stands for. And the messenger RNA is kind of like a recipe or a little note of instructions to your body. They are encapsulated in these little fat bubbles in the vaccine. And the reason why we have to keep these vaccines super, super cold is because these little fat bubbles with the mRNA are extremely fragile. So they actually keep them frozen so that they don't break apart in the vaccine vials. So when they get injected, basically what's happening is that the mRNA strand, it's like a recipe. The little fat bubble goes into your cell and it gives your cell this recipe to make a protein. And this recipe is basically the spike protein. So the little outer area of the coronavirus. And it basically tells your cell to make this protein that is the spike protein of the virus. And the mRNA actually just degrades right after that. It's very quick. It's kind of like one of my colleagues calls it the Snapchat vaccine. It delivers this recipe. Your cell basically gets the recipe to make the spike protein, just that one protein piece, and then the message degrades. And so once your body produces the spike protein, which it does over the course of about a few weeks, your body learns to say, hey, this spike protein is not part of our body. It's a foreign invader. We want to create antibodies to fight it off. So your body starts producing these antibodies. And what happens is that once you have these antibodies, then when it encounters the actual coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, then it fights it off much more effectively. And in fact, the mRNA vaccines, both from Pfizer and from Moderna, are seen to have been found so far to be 100% effective against severe COVID-19. So the type of COVID-19 that lands you in the hospital, they're 100% protective of it, which is really amazing, actually. So just the two vaccines I want to highlight are the ones that are currently approved for vaccinations, the Pfizer vaccine here, and then the Moderna vaccine. And you can see actually what Dr. Lightfoot talked about in terms of just, mistrust and also trying to make it more equitable. Both of these studies intentionally had African-American or Black leads to their studies. So Dr. Oblagu was the lead on the Pfizer trial in the United States. And then Dr. Corbett, who's done a number of really amazing talks on the Moderna vaccine and mRNA vaccines, was the lead on the Moderna vaccine trial. Moderna in particular actually did a really good job trying to recruit a a fair percentage of people of color into the trials. So both these trials had about 10% African-American study participants. And I believe Pfizer had about 15% Latinx and Moderna had about 20% Latinx study participants. So they tried to be more equitable in terms of who was studied, who had access to this study. And both, as I mentioned, were found to be 100% effective at preventing severe COVID-19. So just really amazing efficacy, which we hope, in the real life rollout that's happening right now, we hope that continues to be the case. In addition, on the top right here, there's a few other vaccines that are pretty far along in the trials. The Oxford AstraZeneca one, which you may have heard about, it's about 70% efficacious. And the nice thing about that, it's super cheap, it's easy to manufacture. And it's being rolled out. It's actually it's gotten early authorization in Great Britain and it's being rolled out in India as well. So Janssen, Novavax, Sanofi Pasteur are other types of vaccines that are further along in the trials. Hopefully we'll see results from those trials in the next month or so. And then we'll have more vaccine candidates and hopefully more vaccine access for everybody. So finally, I want to end on this slide, which is a little complicated, but this is how it is in the United States. They made it complicated. This is how we are prioritizing who gets the vaccine. And so this is the United States one. And each state, unfortunately, has their own priority table. So it becomes more complicated because it basically trickles down. This is the US priority scheme. Then there's the state priority schemes. And then oftentimes each county has their own priority scheme. So it ends up being pretty complicated. But what I wanted to highlight is in the original scheme for the United States, people living with HIV were in phase 2. So if a person did not get their vaccine in phase 1 because they weren't a healthcare worker or an older adult, then they would be in phase 2, which is people of all ages with comorbidities that put them at moderately higher risk. And there's some debate I don't know, it's probably in other states too, but in California, there is currently a debate whether HIV should put people at high risk as opposed to moderate risk for COVID-19. So there's ongoing active debate around that. So just want to end with that and allow other folks to talk and also want to hear your questions coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie.
Amazing, ladies, doctors, you're amazing. Thank you.
So, great information. We really appreciate our experts dropping in. We know you are so busy. And so we're going to keep it moving. I'm not going to take up much time. I'm going to introduce the next two presenters. So we heard about what a vaccine is, what it takes to be in a trial. We heard about COVID-19, HIV from Dr. Wong. So now we're going to hear from a person that is on the front line. She's a respiratory therapist. She's also taken the vaccine herself. Her name is Minister Desiree Rushing. She's raising her grandson, Isaac, who is now 12 years old, and homeschooling him as a teacher among her busy schedule. She has a 42-year-old son, which she had at 45, I guess. And she's very close to her family. She's a real estate agent, intercessory prayer leader of the Church for Me. And just this long bio. She's also my personal sister. I love her so much. But again, she can tell you the experience that frontline workers are having in the hospital, working long hours, crowded waiting rooms, and just how the toll it takes on our frontline workers. And then the experience of getting that first vaccine. And I'm not sure if she's gotten the second one. Also to note, Desiree Rushing has also been diagnosed with HIV since 1986. And she runs 3 marathons, one in Hawaii, Italy, and San Francisco. You go, girl. And she sat on the board of World. So with that, I'm going to introduce Desiree Theus-Rushing. And after that, John Fitzgerald Reed will follow, who was born in Louisiana. He now lives in Texas. He's one of the AIDS Health Foundation advocates in Texas. But what John is going to talk about, his experience of being HIV positive, and also...
John's not positive.
Oh, so John is not positive.
No.
Thank you, Veronica.
No.
So, but John works with HIV positive people.
Right.
Is why I assume that, and you should never assume. But he's also had COVID. So he's going to talk about his experience of having COVID. And he's also a minister. He says the most important time in his life was when he accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior. And shortly after that, he married the most amazing woman. They have a beautiful life in Lancaster, Texas, and many children, but I'll let John talk about that. And so now we're going to go to Desiree. Thank you for being here, Desiree.
Thank you. I'm putting on my timer, 10 minutes. There we go. So I want to thank you, Jesse, for even thinking about me to come on. And I want to thank you, Dr. Wong, and thank you, Dr. Lightfoot. I'm following you guys. This is a hard follow. I see Betty. I want to say hi to Betty Blackmore G. Maurice, you know I love you. Jesse, I see you around all the time. And the person I invited on, my mentee, Destiny, and everyone else here. I want to start with being taught how Jesse and Maurice taught me. On World AIDS Day, I was sitting at work and I got a call from Maurice. You remember that, Maurice? And what he said was, Desi, I want to thank you for the work you do. And I was like, what was he talking about? And he said, you know, just for the work you have done around HIV and AIDS, okay? And I was like, yeah, but see, when he called me, I had just got through doing a cold blue on 2 of my patients down in ER. So I was completely oblivious to what he was saying. And what he said was, just think about, you first worked with the pandemic. I don't have to talk about how I got it. I don't rehearse that anymore. It is not important. I was diagnosed. Here I am 30 years later, doing well, as you heard from the autobiography. And I was like, God, yeah, this is just like that. Another pandemic. That's exactly what it is. I'm just on the other end of it. What it reminded me of is me wanting to get back to working around doing things like this in HIV. So that's my background. So as I began to think about what Maurice told me, I began to work a little different with my patients. I am a minister also. So I would go into the rooms with where my COVID patients are. And I mean, you guys, this is so real. We have a whole wing for people diagnosed. And they would give me from room 401 all the way around to 424. We have them in ICU on ventilators, where they're on BiPAPs and high flows. We have them in the ER department where they just people come in and we don't know what's happening. We treat everybody like they're diagnosed. And this is what led me up to getting the vaccine. We treat everybody like they're diagnosed. You guys got to wear the little pretty masks I seen, the little pretty colors and stay back and all that. This is what I have to wear 24/7. This is an N95. You see how tight this is around my face? Then we wear this to protect that. And then we wear this to protect the particles that come out when we're giving aerosol treatments, or say the ventilator pop open or something like that. My first COVID patient, she had a little bracelet on and it had a cross on it. And she was in a room where she could see the Mount Diablo Hills. And I told her, I said, you could be okay. You could be just fine. Don't worry about it. I was off for 2 days. I got back and I got a call to CMU. Well, I didn't think it was her because she was up on the 4th floor, but she got bad enough. And I can't talk about the patient's name and stuff, so this is not HIPAA. I'm talking about a case. She went downstairs And they called me and said, Desi, you got too mad telly. You need to go take care of this patient. I walked in and it was her. And she looked at me and her lips were blue and she was like, am I gonna make it? I said, yeah, you gonna make it. Come on. So we got her and they was fussing over what bed. Just get her, put her on your back. Let's get her where she need to go. We got her there. And you guys know what? She didn't make it. She didn't make it. That tore me up. Mess with me. And I'm trying to reason with God, trying to figure out what is this all about. But we know that he came that we might have life. And Satan came to steal, kill, and destroy. Y'all asked me to come on. I got to talk about what's in me. And I was like, this ain't of you. Just like HIV wasn't of you when I got raped. Okay? That wasn't of you. This ain't of you. If that didn't take me out, and I'm not going to let this take me out. I'm going to deal with this, and I'm going to talk to these patients. And just 2 weeks ago, I was on an intercessory line, and I was still hurt behind that. That happened about 7 months ago. And I got in my spirit, you did help her. You talked about me with her. We all go. We all got a place to go. But are you ready to go? And so I just felt like I played a part in just being there for her. So that was my first one. And after that, you guys, it just came and it came and it came. White ones, black ones, pink ones, green ones. And they just came. Not a whole lot of people diagnosed with HIV, but a lot of people. The first question was, well, how'd you get it? I went to Vegas. How'd you get it? This time went on. I had Thanksgiving with my family, a whole lot of family. Well, how did you get it? We had Christmas. Well, how did you get it? New Year's. I was out. Come on now, the doctor just explained certain things that we need to do. We have to play a part in this the same way we played a part. Well, I played a part when I got diagnosed with HIV. I had to protect myself. I had to protect others. I have family and loved ones that I felt like needed me. I had my son at 19 years old. And I do use Clairol, but this is my front lace right now today. Amen. I had to do what I needed to do to get where I am today when I had HIV. I have to do the same thing with the knowledge about COVID. Why did I take the vaccine? You guys seen that movie Tombstone where I think it was Doc who said, I'll be your Huckleberry. Nobody in my department. Nobody in my department. Well, what you gonna do, Desi? Please sign me up. And I'm not telling everybody this because I did call my HIV doctor and I got informed about all of this. I didn't get as informed as I did today, but I got informed and she said, okay, it's okay. When I ran those marathons, that's when I started taking HIV medication because I knew I had my immune system wasn't like others. She said, I'll let you run that since you just got to do something, but you start taking medication. And I start taking medication. So just like that, I took the first shot and you know, Pfizer, they said, we don't want you to have to go back to work when you take it. So they let us be off. So you take it when you're off. It came to the hospital one day. I took it the next day. I had my couple of days off. I had a little soreness and then I was fine. Then 3 weeks later, we had to take the next dosage and I was off. And I went up there and I took the next dosage and they time you because you got to sit 15 minutes to see if something happened. And a guy was like, oh, dog, this Desi, you want to go, huh? Yep. Because that time I was going back to work, not respiratory work, but I was going back to doing screening on greeting, any coughing or shortness of breath, you know, as you come in the hospital and they pay me as much as I do respiratory therapy. So yeah, I wanted my little $2. He was like, okay, just go on. Now I will tell you, I fell from a U-Haul truck and I had a torn meniscus and I had surgery. So half the time, I don't know if it's that when I'm sore or whatever's going on. Sometimes I just get sore. But where I had that vaccination the second time, I was cool in the fan. And I'm also the type that I'm gonna do whatever it takes to get the job done, especially when it comes to me. You know how when you're on the airplane and they say first, before you try to help somebody else if something happened, put the oxygen over your face first. I had to stand out for my coworkers. the other people I work with. I stood out and said, Desi, you gonna do it? Yeah, I'm doing it. It's done. Let me do it. Y'all scared? You scared? You, Mr. Marine, you scared? But I've seen a lot. I'm glad I've taken it. Having HIV has awakened me to so much, just to be grateful. I've lost a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of family members. I've lost a lot of, not family members, but friends that I know of from COVID. And I'm feeling like if they would have had the opportunity to take a vaccination, I don't know why we don't have one for HIV, but I know we have one for COVID, and I trust and I believe in it. And I was at first with one of the ones to say, oh, they just trying to give us something so we could be a statistic and they use us first. Use me, because see, I got a better chance with this than going in those rooms the way I do 24/7. And I'm the type, if I got somebody that's cold blue and I don't have on my mask yet, and I know they're needing help, they put my gowns on me, put my stuff on me while I'm doing what I do, because it's innate. It comes innate. I don't think about me when it comes to being in there when we have somebody just rush through there. And as long as I feel like I did the best that I could do with that, then I'm okay. And that's all we can do. We can only do the best that we can do. We're not God. The prayer that we should have had when we started this, I should have said that. You know what I'm saying? But the demonic stuff that goes on, that's just God letting us know it's still people that's tripping, that don't care, that will still talk about you if you got HIV, still talk about you if you got COVID, still talk about you if your teeth is bucked. Who cares? Who cares? It's not my business really about what other people say about me. But when they come on the line, interrupting education that we can get, I have an attitude about there. The words didn't hurt me, because words can't hurt me. I didn't been through enough. But when it comes to me listening and hearing what I can get, that upset me. We pray for those people and we keep it moving. 10 minutes and 35 seconds. I'm through.
Boom, shakalaka.
Thank you.
So I want to apologize to everyone for that. That's the nature of the life we're living in today, technology. It happens in all kind of Zoom events that I've been in. So that's part of using Zoom technology, that we're going to get those bombers. And so we're going to keep moving on. And now I'm going to let you hear from. Did you have something to say?
And as you move on,
Sorry.
I wanted to say something real quick too. I just want to thank everybody. And I appreciate that was a powerful word, powerful information from the doctors, powerful message from my minister. And thank you, co-hosts, because I think everybody kind of jumped in. Everybody who has been set for co-hosts, that was including the doctors and everybody that was on. Chelsea, bang up, y'all. Jesse, y'all, thank you for doing a bang up job. Teamwork definitely makes the dream work. Girl, you just brought the word, and I thank you. And I'm going to jump out, but I just want to let everybody know you can look in the chat. Dr. Lightfoot did have to leave. She left her contact information. Also, I've been trying to add bios as we go along. So you see the bios there. Please feel free to put your email in the link, and we will send you the program directly, so you will have the information for each speaker who has participated today. I'm going to jump to John. John, bring the noise. Thank you, y'all. Jesse, BC, I love you. Thank you so much, y'all. Coming at you.
Hey, man, how's everybody doing today? I just want to get this out the way, that God love you and I love you too, and there's nothing you can do about it. To God be the glory.
I know that's right. Amen.
And I just want to just share a little bit about me and my COVID-19 experience. Amen. You might hear that a lot because I use that a lot, minister. Amen. So I'm going to tell you, I tested on November the 22nd, and my test came back on the 25th and it was negative. So I called my doctor about 2 days later because I thought I had a sinus infection that was coming on, which is I get that every year about this time, a sinus infection. So I called in to her to see if she could let me come in and take the steroid shot that I get every year during that time. And she advised me that a lot of folks had been coming in that had said that their sinus was messing with them, and she sent them to get tested, and they turned out they was COVID, they was positive. So I went and I got tested, and my test came back the same day saying that I got tested on the 2nd, and the test came back the same day saying that I was positive for COVID. So I came home, my wife and my kids was out. So they came into the house and I had my mask on, and I told her that I was fit to isolate in the room, get what you're gonna get out, because I'm gonna have to be in there for 10 days. So my next step was to make sure that my kids and my wife got tested. So I sent them the next day to be tested. And so they test came back on a Friday. And my two kids, 11 and 9, they test came back positive. My wife's came back negative. So at that time, I had been isolated for 2 days. So they started isolating themselves, and we had to stay in 10 days. My wife had to stay 14 days. And during this time, we got a 7-month-old that we're taking care of, because my niece, yeah, that's another story. So we had to have him get checked too. So we all in the house stayed in our separate rooms. One thing about this COVID, the first 2 days I felt fine. No, I mean I felt fine. And then that third day, I started feeling my body changing. There was something going on with my body, and I knew it was something going on because it just wasn't the same. And so the thing about COVID is the daytime is good, but at nighttime, that's when you feel it the most. That's when them symptoms really start kicking in. There were some nights I barely made it from the restroom to my bed, back to my bed. That's how weak I was. That's how it was coming down on me so rapidly, so fast. All of a sudden, it just, whoop, it came down. Fever, lost the appetite, lost the smell, shaking real bad. Just, I'm talking about, I can feel that it was trying to take over my body. So I told myself, and the minister know what I'm talking about. I could feel it was trying to take over my body, but you know, I don't consider myself as lucky. I consider myself blessed. Amen. Because it could have took control of my body if I would have allowed it. COVID, let me tell you something about COVID. COVID would, if you don't get a handle on it quick, it will take over your body quick. It was the unknown, because every night was a different was different. So it was unknown. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I was going to wake up and see my kids or my wife again. I didn't know if I was going to lay down and I wasn't going to wake up again, because that's just how bad it was. I didn't tell my wife. I always told her, and I always told my kids. They asked, "Is you okay?" Yeah, I'm okay. But really, I was going through some stuff in that room by myself, sweating, fever. I'm talking about just I really didn't. I thought God was gonna call me home. To be honest, I thought He was gonna call me home, and I was ready. But I got to thinking, minister, God showed me in the pulpit that I was gonna contract COVID. He showed me that, and He also showed me that I was gonna get over it. That was fear kicking in, that had me thinking that I was fit to leave here. And I'm gonna tell you something about COVID too. After the 10 days, my smell still was gone. My taste still was gone. And right now, as today, my body is still not the same. And I don't think my body will ever be the same, because I don't know, I know it's different. I know it's not like it was before I caught COVID. And so every day I just pray to God that, that He allowed me to get through this. I tell everybody this. This is something you don't want to play with. This is something that you don't want to play with. wear your mask. And I did everything. I did everything. I wore my mask. I stayed social distance. I sanitized my hands. I couldn't tell you where I got it from, but all I know is I got it. And I know that it's no joke. So people going around talking about this just like a cold and the flu, don't listen to that. Don't listen to that. This is dangerous. This is the worst feeling is the unknown, not knowing if you're gonna make it the next day. That's just how serious this is. And I was able to take the vaccine myself. So I got my first vaccine, and I'm due to get my second one on the 8th. My wife was the only one in the house didn't get COVID, but she's a RN. Her mother, she took her 2 shots. My wife took her 2 shots, and they're doing fine. I tell folks this here, and it's no joke. Y'all listen to me and listen to me good. I'd rather take that vaccine than to experience what I experienced with that COVID-19. Because only by the grace of God, I'm sitting here talking to y'all now. So I'm telling y'all, my brothers and my sisters, if you got the opportunity to take this vaccine, pray to your God and do the right thing. COVID is no joke. It's taking us out, and it's taking us out quick. I stayed hydrated. I stayed with vitamin D. I took, and the thing about it, they don't have nothing to give you. They don't have nothing to give you. They'll tell you to stay home, stay hydrated, stay to yourself, take Mucinex. That's it. That's all we have to work on. That's all they have to work on, but I had something else to work on because I put mine in his hands, and that's how I made it. So I'm just here to I'm thank God that I'm here to share this and to tell my story and to tell my brothers and my sister, y'all. This is no joke. If there's no one else on, if there's someone else on here that had COVID, they know what I'm talking about. They know what I'm talking about. It's nothing to play with, and it can come down. It can hit you just like that. And if your immune system is weak, it it's gonna take you out. And the 9 times out of 10, if you get on that ventilator, you're not coming off. You're not coming off. And that's the truth. If you go to the hospital, it's a possible chance you're not coming out because it can move just that quick, y'all. It can take control of your body. My 10 minutes up. I hope I've said something that can help my brothers and my sisters. Don't take this lightly. Don't play with this here COVID-19 because it's real. May God bless y'all. May God keep y'all is my prayer for you. And I'm like Obama. I dropped the mic. I'm out.
Whoa!
What an amazing program. And again, I want to send thank yous out, first of all, to my Ph.D. Veronica for putting this together. Your technical abilities is amazing. I want to thank all the leaders that are on this phone that are in the HIV community. It's so many, I can't name each and every one of you by name, but thank you. We have a lot of leaders here in the Bay Area that's on this call from different agencies. I see UCSF being represented, and so many people that we owe a thanks to because this has been powerful. And do you want to say something, Veronica, before we go into our question and answer period? And I'm not sure, and just real quick, I'm not sure if she's going to be on to join us, but I know Dr. Wong is still on to answer questions, but we might have Dr. Sammy LaBega, who is a family physician here in the Bay Area, join us. She's an HIV specialist practicing at a medical care center here in East Oakland, which is like the Hood of Oakland, and she's a formerly associate medical director. And so she should be joining us to answer questions. So I'm gonna defer to Veronica. If you have any more thing, then we can just go right into the question and answer period.
And we will go directly into the question and answer period. I have copied email addresses from the chat box. We have information that is in the chat box. You can list your email also in the chat box, or if you know any of the speakers, or well, I don't put the speakers on the spot, but Jesse or myself directly, I will type our email addresses directly into the chat box so that you can send questions directly to us as well. So we're going to, I see Shirley has put, Ms. Brisco, I have a question. Shirley, if you can unmute yourself.
Wait, no, wait.
No,
we have people before Shirley. So
we have people before Shirley. So Shirley, hold on.
Suggesting people raise your hand. There's a way in the 3 dots. You can raise your hand, and then we'll come back and we'll take the hands in order. But I want to go to Joseph Bell and let you, Mr. Bell, ask your question out loud. You have a couple of questions. And
let me just say this real quick, Mr. Bell, before you start. The time is only scheduled till 4:30. I don't know how long Ms. Wong can stay or any of our presenters. If you can stay longer, we do have the ability to continue, okay, for anybody that wants to stay on. But I know the schedules are tight for many of the speakers who are doing such phenomenal work. So, Jesse.
So directed to Sophie. Sophie, one of the questions Mr. Bell had was about nutrition. Should nutrition, should that be a part of someone's focus to avoid COVID? If you get COVID, will that help? And the other one is, and I don't know, this could be to anybody. Do we know if Hank Aaron got vaccinated a week before he died? So I guess he's trying to infer that maybe the vaccination contributed to his death.
Jesse, you want me to take that?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear if anybody else has input on it. For nutrition, that's a great question. Nutrition is really important for immune strength. So for both just your immune system's ability to fight infections and also your immune system's ability to control infections once you have it. So I think what's hard is that there's just nutrition is just so wide ranging, right? Like there's so many different aspects of nutrition. Having enough hydration so your cells can function, that's part of it, but also having enough, multitude of vitamins, right? So I like to say that if you can eat as many whole foods as possible, like plants and vegetables give you a wide variety of vitamins that your body needs to actually function and your immune system needs to function. I think where the jury is out in the science is whether supplements can help your immune function. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, but in terms of being studied, there's not a whole lot of information about that. Not a lot of good information, I could say. So I just really encourage people to, get enough sleep, like sleep 7, 8, 9 hours, whatever you need. Make sure you are drinking fluids, right? And oftentimes, orange juice can do well because it helps you absorb some of that. It gives you some vitamin C. Unless you're watching your sugars, then maybe you want to stick with water or tea. And then, and make sure you're eating whole foods. So lots of like as much whole grains, vegetables, and fruits that you can handle. So that's what I would recommend around nutrition. And that is, those are your immune system needs a variety of things to function well. And that helps you fight infections and also manage them when you get them.
Thank you for answering that. I really do appreciate it. And I really appreciate your time, all of you, for helping us through this whole situation here that we're having. And however, after this, since we're about to end at 4:30, I'd really like to make some other comments or questions when we have the time. Can I do that?
You can put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them.
Can I just say about
Okay, but Joseph, we really appreciate your questions. And so just put them in the chat. We're going to try to answer some more. And then go ahead, John, answer about Hank Aaron.
Let me respond really fast. There are answers for us. That's all I wanted to say. There are answers. We do not have to sit and just wait on what kind of food we eat. There are real answers, that God would not leave us without answers, and there are answers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Go, Joseph.
About the Hank Aaron, testing week before he died. I want to just say, let's don't assume that it had anything to do with the test. Hey man, we don't want. I'm not saying you saying that, my brother, but we don't want it because we're already afraid to take the test. Hey man, it don't take much to turn us away from taking this vaccine. I mean, taking the vaccine. So I don't know how he died. All I know is he had underlying conditions, but I don't know how he died, and I don't want to say it was because he took the vaccine.
Thank you, John. So we're going to go ahead with Maurice, but before Maurice asks his question, I also want to say this was not meant to sway anybody from taking the vaccine or not. I take the vaccine tomorrow. I can't wait. But we just wanted to make sure you have the information where you can make your own decision, however you make your decision. So go ahead, Maurice.
So thank you, everybody, for all of the information that you provided. I really only have two questions. I'm scheduled to take the vaccination on Thursday, and I'm taking it out at East Oakland at the mall. And I'm wondering first if there's a difference between the two vaccines that are available right now. Is one preferred over the other? The second question is, I'm HIV positive for, I have that diagnosis for the last 35 years. HIV doesn't have me, however. And I am with 350 T cells. I'm undetectable. But I'm wondering if the vaccine, if there is an effectiveness issue, if the immune system, isn't completely full, although I'm completely undetectable. And should I have, is there anything else that I need to do to protect myself even beyond taking the vaccine?
So we have Dr. Wong still with us. We also have Dr. Sammy who just joined us. So either one of you can answer that.
Sammy, do you want to take it?
I was going to say, I came in partway through the question, I think. So I think Sophie can take it, but I will jump in when I can. Thank you all for allowing me to join late.
Thank you for joining us. So Maurice, great questions. The first question you had was the difference between the two vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So they're both mRNA vaccines, and basically they work the same exact way. So the main difference is one needs to be stored in super ultra cold freezers, and the other one can be stored in fairly normal freezers. And so the main difference is actually just their handling, but the way they work is exactly the same. There's not really one preferred over the other. And the performance that we see in the studies and the data that we have so far is they basically perform the same way. So they're similarly effective. They work the same way. From my perspective as a clinician, I would not prefer one over the other. It's actually just, which one can you handle in the freezer that you have, right? It's more like that question.
Are they interchangeable?
So that's never been studied, whether you can. I love how she walked through it. And so we don't recommend to interchange them because we haven't studied whether that's okay or not. So I think maybe UK might be starting to say maybe, I don't know, there's some places where they're like, oh, I guess if there's no other option, you can interchange it. But I think that would be, only if you can't get your second dose from the first kind. But right now we're not recommending that we interchange them. But you're right. I mean, it makes sense logically, like you could interchange them if they work the same way, right? So I think that's still being looked at just in terms of logistics, right? Whichever one you can get. Maurice, your second question was around CD4 cells and whether it changes the efficacy of the vaccine, right?
Yes.
That's a great question. So that's something that we don't have information on quite yet. There were 179 people living with HIV in the Moderna trial. We don't have information about what their CD4 counts were. So we don't have a breakout of like if people had different CD4 cells, if their efficacy was different. As far as we know, the efficacy for the people living with HIV wasn't different from the general overall study group. That's all we know so far. But we don't know anything more specific than that. So the good news is when your viral load is suppressed, we actually see similar clinical outcomes for a lot of people. So that's a really important thing. So viral load suppression is really, really great. And that means that your immune system has a chance to recover and to act. And so I think that's a really great piece. Whether your CD4 count impacts the efficacy or not, we're not sure yet. And I think one of the things we're considering is whether we want to actually check antibody response for people living with HIV who get the COVID-19 vaccine. And we're still researching that and trying to figure out if that's going to be useful or not. Dr. Lebega, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that was great. Thank you, Sophie.
So there is a risk for people possibly who are immune system compromised.
Possibly. And I think the recommendation for all people, whether or not we are immune compromised or not, is to continue wearing our masks until we know more information, right? So continuing to do the masking and the distancing. Again, like with HIV, you have to do multiple preventive things, right? Not one thing is 100% perfect. And so the vaccine is not 100% perfect. Masking is not 100% perfect, as Pastor John described. You could do so many different things and it doesn't 100% protect you. But if you do multiple things, then there's a greater chance that you'll be protected. And so like with everybody else, I think continuing to mask and distance when you can will help increase the efficacy and prevention.
So my last question is, because it's taken less than a year to develop a vaccine for COVID, why do we still not have a vaccine for HIV?
That is a really great question. And a lot of us in the HIV world have been asking that question. So the mRNA vaccine technology was actually developed in part to develop an HIV vaccine. So, what we got with the Pfizer Moderna vaccine was kind of built on the back of some HIV vaccine research. And that's been developed since the 1990s. So the mRNA technology has been in development for almost 20 years. And we finally got one because people were pushed, right? Like the COVID pandemic really pushed people and actually pushed a lot of funding too, like Dr. Lightfoot described. And so it enabled us to actually create this COVID vaccine really quickly. Moderna, which is one of the makers of the COVID vaccine, is currently investigating an HIV vaccine as well. So one of the challenges with the HIV vaccine is that how we do the spike protein for COVID? So for HIV, the HIV virus, there's not like one thing that works that we found so far. It tends to escape the different proteins that we've presented. And so the challenge is finding the right protein to transcribe so that it's actually protective against HIV infection. So that's the main challenge now.
Thank you. Elle, do you want to ask the question or I can ask it for you? Okay, so Elle had a question and the question was, is there any study on how HIV meds and the vaccine work together?
That would be me. That was my question.
Hi, beautiful.
Hi, Jesse. I can jump in, and I think Sophie can help fill in, but I would say that the studies that were done so far on the vaccine included people living with HIV who were on the medications. And so those are the studies that we're basing our knowledge on. And so far, those studies showed that there was no issue for people who are taking their HIV medication. If anything, like Sophie was saying, taking your medication and helping your viral load to be suppressed and your immune system to be as strong as possible helps the vaccine to do what it's trying to do better. So we actually have reason to believe, that much more reason to believe, that being on HIV medications when you get the vaccine is actually going to be helpful for helping you get the most protection you can.
Sophie, you have anything to add?
No, that's great. Thanks, Jim.
So I don't see any more questions. So keep putting your questions into the chat. We got about 15 more minutes to take questions. One question I had was, so I know mask is a great way to prevent. So I just saw a report. They were like, the masks that we wear, the cloth masks, really don't really protect. So every week they're coming out with something different. And now they're talking about the only way we can really be protected wearing a mask is everybody has an N95 mask. Is that true or not?
Well, so with masks, there's two ways that masks help us. One is it prevents the respiratory droplets from coming out of people.